call to order this meeting of the Board of Selectmen. It is 7:05, and I would ask everyone here this evening to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Started. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Well, we have a nice full room. Everyone is excited to hear about our one agenda item for this evening, and that is our 7 o'clock appointment with Town Manager Jeff Hull. And it's the presentation of the Town Manager's fiscal 2017 budget. That said, I'll turn the meeting over to Jeff Hull.
Thank you. Good evening, and to Chairman Shampoo and members of the Board of Selectmen, Chairman Manganelli, members of the Finance Committee. I'm pleased to offer the fiscal 2017 budget. You'll note there's two documents in particular that I'll be referring to during the course of this presentation. One being the operating budget and the other being the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan. These both paint a picture, so to speak, of the town's short and long-term financial plan for investing in the provision of services and also for buildings, the vehicle fleet, water lines, the various infrastructure that we require to stay in business, so to speak. There's really going to be two themes that you will hear during the course of this presentation, one being that of fiscal sustainability. I believe that one of my roles and responsibilities beyond simply presenting a budget that is balanced for the upcoming fiscal year is to also present a budget that is sustainable, so that over the course of time, the decisions that are being made now in this year have implications that will not create revenue shortfalls exceeding revenues in the future. And I think in some of the ways that we have done that historically and continue to do that are in part through conservative revenue forecasting. This has been a long-standing practice, certainly with my predecessor and me as well, that we look at the revenues and are cautious in terms of what we expect to have available to us. Also, we achieve this sustainability through limiting the budget increases to the greatest extent possible, and then finally by taking opportunities to identify resources, funds that we can set aside for the future. The second theme tonight is that of community. Certainly, I don't have to tell members of the board, the Finance Committee, that Wilmington, one of its hallmarks is community and looking out for others. I think there's a number of elements of this budget. We'll speak to that. In part, I would point to Superintendent Delai's budget, where she is proposing resources for social and emotional well-being of the students, and a particular focus on the early grades to bolster that area. One of the areas that I'll be talking about a little bit later is the opportunity to support a long-standing institution in town, if you will, and that is the July 4th celebration. And then finally, creating additional open spaces for people of common interest to gather. The economy, I think it's fair to say Wilmington has weathered the so-called Great Recession, and certainly the signs are that we are coming out of that recession. One of the hallmarks, I think, is with the relocation of the Sylvania facility from Danvers to Wilmington. That was a big boon for the town. 125,000 square foot facility that they made major renovations to. It's a real state-of-the-art corporate headquarters for their Americas division. brings 500 employees to the town of Wilmington. As I understand it, they're also looking to hire additional personnel. So I think that's good for the local economy in many respects. I would also point to the values, home values. You'll recall from the presentation in November that Karen Rashes gave on the classification hearing. She noted that home values are up about 3.5%. The average home in Wilmington is now worth about $393,000, which is up from $380,000 about a year ago. And then the unemployment rate in Wilmington is at a 9-year low. It's at 3.9%. So all of these things seem to be favorable indicators for the town. And I think one of the things that this perhaps may cause is a measure of tension between the fact that the economy is starting to grow and perhaps a desire to spend more, perhaps draw down some of our reserves. But from my perspective, in spite of this good news, and I certainly don't want to be a doomsdayer, but as we all know, the economy is very cyclical. I think just following the news today, we see how volatile the market is, certainly nationally and globally. So in spite of this good news, I still think it's important to take a rather cautious approach to how we spend going forward. So in terms of the bottom line, so to speak, with regard to the budget is $104,326,543. That's what I'm proposing for an appropriation at this upcoming town meeting. It reflects an overall increase of 3.87%. That's inclusive of all the expenditures, including transfers from free cash to various stabilization accounts and the so-called non-discretionary funds as well. One of the goals that I set going into this process was to hold the non-discretionary increases, those being non-discretionary being the statutory charges, some of these obligatory charges that we have, as well as transfers in free cash, hold that increase to less than 3%. And I'm pleased to say that we were able to do that. That number 2.43 is the budget increase exclusive of those previously referenced items. Education is up about 4%, both the Shawshene Tech and the high school. Municipal government, that is all of the general government departments, public works, public buildings, police, fire, the administrative offices, is about 7.9%, 0.79% increase. And then the other charges, which I referenced previously, including insurance and statutory charges and so on, is up about 6%. So, I think this is a manageable number. In terms of our revenues, you'll see that this chart shows some gradual increase. The biggest revenue item clearly is the property tax. It has been and always will be the largest revenue point in the town of Wilmington. Right now, we receive about 72.24% of our revenue from the property tax, and that number has gradually increased in the last few years, and it's increased by about 1% again this year. That equates to $75,363,235. Each year, as part of this process, we first of all go through and increase the tax levy by 2.5%, because, as you know, Wilmington has for many years, I think since the inception of 2.5%, taxed to the levy limit. So we increase the prior year's levy by 2.5%, and then in addition to that, we factor in new growth. New growth is a consequence of building, whether it's the Osram facility that I mentioned previously, new homes. Unfortunately, in this past year, the new growth was much higher than we projected, in large measure because of the Osram project. They did some significant work to that building on 200 Ballardvale I don't know if anybody had an opportunity to go over there for the ribbon cutting, but it is clearly a state-of-the-art facility. So between the permitting that was required and just the value that came out of those upgrades, that was big for us in terms of new growth. And I think we, in addition to that, we have had 46 new homes this past calendar year that were constructed. There were a lot of fit-ups. So all in all, it was a good year for the town in terms of new growth. Going forward, we don't have any project like the Osram project on the horizon, so I'm not expecting that we're going to have the level of new growth next year that we have this year. So that all collectively establishes what our tax levy is going to be. The second largest component of revenue is local aid. Local aid makes up about 13% of the revenue stream. And this number has grown at a fairly slow pace. This past year, this current year, we're expecting about $109,000 in additional local aid. Going forward in fiscal 17, we're projecting about $91,000. In my estimation, Governor Baker has been very friendly to cities and towns. I think in terms of everything that he has done to this point, in large measure, between the aid that we received last year, the fact that he did not make local aid cuts in spite of the budget problems he had last year, it seems to me to demonstrate that he's a team player with us. In spite of that, I think that there are a number of challenges that are going to be difficult for him to overcome. You may have read the article in the Globe this past week that projects a state deficit for 2017 of $635 million. Obviously, that's he's going to have to come up with a game plan to address that. Beyond that, there's a number of other issues that are on not only his plate, but the legislature's plate, including how to deal with the increasing costs of the GIC, which is the insurance plan that funds state employees in some municipalities. Mass Health has some financial issues, certainly the MBTA. So there's a number of large issues that the state is going to have to deal with, not to mention the fact that both the Standard & Poor's, which is the rating agency that looks at the state's creditworthiness, as well as the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, have really implored the legislature to restore their rainy day fund. They, like the town, have a rainy day fund in the event that the economy turns south as it has. And one of the things that they've noted is that in spite of the relatively good economy, the state has not put much in the way of back into that rainy day fund. So with all of those things considered, I think it's reasonable to not expect we're going to get a significant increase in local aid. The next third category of revenue, which is about 7% of the revenue stream, is local receipts. This includes building permits, motor vehicle excise tax, and the meals tax. As I previously noted, given the fact that we don't see any major projects like the Osram on the radar for next year, I don't expect to see the same level of growth in terms of building permit fees that we saw this past year. Certainly motor vehicles, there was a report out at the end of calendar 2015 that noted motor vehicle sales broke a 15-year record nationally. I think something in the order of 17.4 million vehicles were sold. I suspect, given the gas prices as they are today, that will foster the increase in car buying. So we have accounted for that in some measure by increasing the motor vehicle excise tax revenue by $200,000 over what was projected last year. So we're projecting that at about $4.1 million. And then also the meals tax. This has really been a slow but steady source for us. Slow growth but steady. This past year we budgeted $335,000 anticipated for the meals tax. I'm seeing right now on a quarterly basis somewhere in the neighborhood of $84,000 to $85,000. So we're projecting that revenue to be at about $340,000, so a slight uptick. But overall, I think the local receipts is going to be a relatively small increase, and in fact less than 1%. This slide here illustrates one of the challenges that we have as the property values for homeowners increase at a greater pace than the CIP. We are seeing that the overall tax burden is shifting to the homeowner. And if you go back and look at this information back in time, you'll see that the shift typically runs somewhere between 55 and 60%. Right now, we're up to 59% of the overall tax burden being shouldered by residents. That's an uptick of about 1% over the previous year. And reciprocally, you'll notice that the CIP, which is the commercial industrial property, is seeing a slight decrease in terms of the overall burden. It's hard to say if this will continue. I suspect as long as, certainly as long as home values, the increase in home values outpaces the increase in commercial industrial property, this will continue. One of the things that's very difficult for us to do is to project on a longer term basis the revenue growth from year to year. And as this slide illustrates, the revenue percentage in revenue growth has fluctuated fairly significantly, anywhere from next to a 0% increase back in 12, somewhere in the order of 9% increase in revenue. So it is a challenge from year to year to really come up with a good solid number on revenue growth. One of the things that I would point out here that is a little disconcerting is that the trend line in terms of the average over the course of that period from 2009 2016 shows that the average revenue growth during that period is declining slightly. So in spite of the spikes, if you average it out, the amount of growth in revenue is on a slight decline. In terms of priorities, as you know, for the last 2-3 years now, I've made a point of identifying the priorities and how we're working towards those. Once again, as has been the case now for 3 years, certainly education is a big priority. And again, I'm supporting the superintendent's request for a 4% increase in Wilmington Public Schools. Last year, you will recall, there was $215,000 that was invested in education and curriculum, working on math and language arts. This year, we're looking to invest another $98,000 in terms of various curriculum for the schools. One of the focus areas that Superintendent DeLye has pointed out is the need to address social emotional development skills for students. I think some of this has been borne out by the recently presented YRBS study and some of the concerns that came out of that in terms of risk behaviors. I think it's important that we look to try to provide the curriculum and the types of skills that students need, whether it's conflict resolution, being able to deal appropriately with the stresses of school and life out of school. All those things, for all those reasons, I think it's important that increase be supported. And I would also note that as part of her efforts here, she's proposing 3.8 full-time equivalents, which roughly translates into roughly two full-time benefit eligible individuals to assist in the efforts there. $100,000 is being proposed for upgrades to their phone system. They also have some technology money budgeted, and there's money budgeted for replacement of a transit van. Energy efficiency is another area that is a focus. I'm really pleased to say that through the efforts of George Hooper, the public building superintendent, we've made some inroads here. Back in 2013, he spoke to me about the idea of transitioning our heating from oil to natural gas, and we've begun doing that in a number of buildings at the North Intermediate. When the heating system was changed out, it was changed over to natural gas. The Shawshene School, similar process, that's now natural gas. Also, the high school, when that was spec'd out, it was intended to be changed over from heating oil to natural gas. The consequence of all these changes, at least in part, is a pretty dramatic reduction in the cost for heating the buildings. In fact, the budget has decreased by $500,000 for heating. And that's certainly not only due to the change to gas, but the work that we've done in terms of the building envelope, if you will, on these facilities, roofs and windows. All those things have contributed to this reduction. We are continuing that work. This year we're proposing 2 roof projects, one being the North Intermediate. This will be phase 2 of a 3-phase project. We're looking to spend $270,000 to replace a section of the roof there, and then $480,000 to replace the Boutwell School roof. In addition, I would note we're continuing to work on lighting is another area in public buildings is looking to change out some of the existing lighting for LED, more efficient lighting, and they've already started to do that over at the middle school. That will continue and should at least mitigate some of the increases in our electricity costs. With regard to the vehicle fleet, this has been, as you know, a long-standing goal of mine to be able to have a more efficient fleet of vehicles. This will be the last year that the police department will have Crown Vics. With the purchase of the new vehicles, all the Crown Vics will be transitioned out of the police department, and the SUVs, believe it or not, are actually more fuel efficient than the 11 mile per gallon Crown Vics. So that's a step in the right direction. One of the things that I'm working on and expect to have completed shortly is a vehicle policy that will look to reduce the vehicle fleet where we can, and also to the extent that there are employees that are required to have vehicles, look to make sure that they have vehicles that are appropriate for their use, rather than simply just transitioning them into Crown Vics, which again is not particularly fuel efficient. With regard to technology, I would note that last year I proposed that we create a technology, an IT department. We had obviously IT personnel for some number of years. I think this has really paid dividends for us. The IT department has been formally in place since July 1st, and during that time a number of changes have been made. The desktops which the town offices have had were of varying ages, had varying types of software on them. A lot of the changeover has taken place in desktops. 41 of the desktops have been replaced to date, which creates uniformity of equipment, uniformity of software, helps us in terms of maintenance, so I think we're going in the right direction there. Also, one of the things that Kendra Rosette, who's the head of IT, made a point of accomplishing was to virtualize our servers so that we're able to reduce the number of servers from 10 to 3. This saves on energy and more importantly provides a measure of redundancy, so if there's a failure with a server, it isn't disabling us in the end user. In addition to that, from a user perspective, through the assistance of IT, the rec department in August rolled out an online program for sign up for their rec program. So to this point, I think about 1,800 or just short of 1,800 applications or requests for recreation programs have been done through the online process, roughly $106,000 through that process. So we will continue with that practice, and I think that's really something that our residents are looking for and expecting, that we be more online friendly. Going forward in 2017, one of the goals is to bring the existing network up to current standards. We're also looking to make upgrades to our website to make it more user-friendly, more engaging, and have more content. So I think those are all good steps for us. The capital improvement plan, this is now the third year this capital improvement plan, and I think it's important that we continue with the capital improvement plan because the rating agency and Department of Revenue, two agencies that we have to be, organizations we have to be mindful of, look at communities that have a capital improvement plan in a favorable light because it demonstrates that we are taking the time to plan for the expenditures that we're making on a larger scale basis. The capital plan anticipates, in addition to the appropriations that we're requesting this year, includes roughly $30 million in additional projects over the course of the next 4 years through 2021. I would also note that with the facilities master plan ongoing, that is due to be completed at the end of the year, I would expect some projects will come out of that, and that's why the question mark is there that even though we have $30+ million on the capital plan docket, that number could change depending upon what comes out of the CIP. So in fiscal 17, we're looking to replace a 1997 pumper, which has certainly served us well, but we need to replace. That will be a borrowing, and we're looking to fund the first stages of redesign of Route 38. This was brought to the Board of Selectmen probably about a year ago to at least initiate that process. We're paying the first 25% of design, and then if it's approved by the Mass DOT, they would actually, and it gets on the Transportation Improvement Program, they would make the commitment to funding the actual work, similar to Lowell Street, to upgrade the roadway, put sidewalks in, and essentially make it a safer and more inviting corridor. So that is one of the items under the capital. Back to the issue of financial stability. Again, one of the things that I'm constantly mindful of is our long-term obligations. OPEB, which is the other post-employment benefits, essentially retiree benefits. I've spoken to this group about many times. I suspect you're probably tired of hearing me, but long and the short of it is this is an obligation that all cities and towns are required to address. We had a recent actuarial study done. We're required to do this every 2 years. Our liability actually went down from $133 million, which was the number from 2013. The most recent study pegs the liability at $119 million, so we're going in the right direction, but still $119 million is a pretty significant burden. And one of the things that I'm looking to suggest we continue to do is to put money into our OPEB trust. Last year we invested $1 million transferred from free cash, and I'm recommending again that we transfer $1 million from free cash to the OPEB liability. This is not going to be the solution to the problem. We're going to need to make plan design changes to our health insurance, and our insurance advisory committee has been re-engaged, if you will, and is actively working at looking at options for changing the health insurance to reduce some of that liability going forward. Beyond that, we have retirement liability. That number, based upon the last actuarial study that was done by Middlesex Retirement, indicates Wilmington's liability is $73 million. I am looking to make a transfer, propose a transfer of $500,000 from free cash to put into our retirement stabilization account, which will bring the total balance in that account up to $1.25 million. If you recall, the intent of having that account was in part to shave, if you will, the spikes that we are potentially going to be receiving in our Middlesex retirement assessment. And the other opportunity it presents is to be able to make direct payments towards that liability. In addition to that, $500,000, I'm also recommending that $500,000 come out of free cash as a direct payment for our unfunded liability. Again, paying down that liability, I think, is important. We're obligated to pay it off by 2035, but if we have the ability to accelerate that payment process, I think it's advisable. Finally, on the capital side, as I mentioned, we've got significant capital requests out there. Last year, there was $1.5 million that was placed in the capital improvement stabilization account, recommending a similar amount this year, which will bring that balance up to a little over $3 million. So again, when you look at the 30+ million in capital demands that we know of, with the prospect of additional capital demands coming out of the facilities plan, I think it's important that we bolster the capital stabilization fund. And I would note that we did have this bond review back in rating review back in August, and one of the things that Standard & Poor's credited us with, in specifically our flexibility because of the amount of money that we have available between free cash and these various stabilization accounts. I would point out, though, that one of the cautionary points that S&P offered up was some measure of concern about our ability to sustain the contributions that we're currently making to the OPEB fund. So I think it's overall favorable for us to continue to invest in these accounts. I know it's sometimes painful. People see that money out there and say, why are we generating so much money? But we're a corporation essentially, and we have to be mindful of our obligations and also be mindful of the prospect that revenues may shrink going forward. So with those transfers, I would expect our free cash balance will still remain in the 10 to 15% of operating budget, which is where S&P likes to see communities. And this graph really, I think, paints a good picture. As I mentioned at the school committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think perhaps some people have been lulled into the idea that we've always had free cash, and why are we generating all this free cash? One of the virtues of having longevity in Wilmington is I remember the days when we did not have all that free cash. And in the late 80s, we had very little. In fact, there were some years that we went into the negative, thanks to the good work of Mike Kyra. In fact, one of his first challenges when he took over was digging the town out of a deficit of something in the order of $850,000 because of failed override. And over the course of time, through his leadership and the department heads' cooperation, the town was able to generate free cash to the point that in 2003 we had $9 million in free cash, which, given the size of the budget at that time, was a fairly significant number. But when the economy went south and state aid was reduced, we relied upon that free cash to avoid user fees, to avoid layoffs, and to sustain the programs that people were expecting that we continue to offer. So in that period of time, that stretch of a few years, we drew that free cash down from $9 million to $3 million. And then, as you see from the graph, we've gradually begun to bring it back up again. But I think it's important that we sustain somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% of our operating budget as available funds, free cash. With regard to personnel, just a couple of highlights from the current year. You'll recall that last year I was recommending the hiring or establishment of a payroll/personnel benefits position. That position was created, and we have a very talented individual that's working in that role. And one of her main responsibilities has been dealing with some of the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. And believe me, I don't probably know the half of them, but what I do know is that there are some fairly significant issues that we're dealing with, and she's been able to stay on top of that, and there are certain requirements that we're obligated to meet. That's certainly one of her responsibilities, but I think the position has worked out well. Just as an aside, one of the saving graces, for the moment anyways, is that we've been spared the Cadillac tax, at least for the next couple of years, so hopefully we can avoid that for longer. I would just want to point out also, again, kudos to the Safety Committee for their efforts in developing programs to reduce our losses. And for the second year in a row now, the Mass Interlocal Insurance Association, which is the group that provides insurance to the town, has acknowledged Wilmington for its efforts to keep its insurance losses down. And that does a couple of things. Obviously, avoiding the workers' comp claim saves the pain for the individual, and it also saves us money. So those are good things to note. In 17, I am looking to hire an additional position in the public buildings department. When the high school was under construction, actually as it was nearing its completion, George Hooper and I talked about the staffing for the building. Prior to the new high school, we had 7 custodians working both day and night shifts. The high school increased the size of the building by roughly 25%. It's a 192,000 square foot building versus the old building was 154 thereabouts. My suggestion at the time was that we try adding 1 new custodian and see if that how that worked for us. We hired a person to begin working there when the school opened in February, and it appears that we're going to need an additional custodian for that building. I think it's a combination of the scale of the building and keeping it properly maintained. Also, you'll note that the walkways are much greater in terms of the overall setup of the campus versus the old campus. So in terms of snow removal, the Public Buildings Department is responsible for snow removal on the sidewalks. Public Works deals with the streets and the driveways and so on. So that would be one full-time benefit eligible employee. Then with regard to Public Works, I'm recommending 2 part-time non-benefit eligible employees for Parks and Grounds. The last time there was an increase in Parks and Grounds was in 2002. Since that time, we have upgraded the Whitfield School Field that is now irrigated. It receives a tremendous amount of use. Since that time, the Little League and soccer has gone from a 1-season program to a 3-season program, which requires more striping and field maintenance. The Yentile project, which will be coming online either later this year or early next year, it's a 9-acre site. Certainly the fact that it's a turf field will have some mitigating effect on maintenance, but there still will be requirements to make sure that the cone rubber is maintained appropriately. In the other field spaces, the basketball and street hockey courts, the green spaces, all those areas are going to have to be maintained. So the thought here is to provide some additional assistance to Parks and Grounds. I wanted to note what I consider to be one of the achievements this past year, and that is the transition to automated trash and recycling. Last year, we took a look at the fact that we were coming up on the end of our trash and recycling contracts, and Mike Woods, the Public Works Director, had talked to some of his colleagues and was advised that some of them had transitioned to automated, and in so doing, had seen a good increase in the amount of recycling. What we were finding was that we had pretty much plateaued in terms of the percentage of recycling, roughly in the 16%, 17% area. So we went through a competitive bid process, received quotes, and ultimately decided to implement an automated recycling and trash program. And I would note that we have seen the dividends that we expected. One of the advantages here has been that since the implementation on July 1st, there's been a 19% increase in the amount of tons of recycled material, and an 8% reduction in trash tonnage. So we went from 8,289 tons down to 7,633. That's calendar 14 to calendar 15, so that's only over a 6-month period. I think the other point that's equally important to note is that for the 6-month period of July 1st, 2015 to December 31st, 2015, we saw a 22% decrease in the cost of disposal as compared with the same period of time in 2014. So that translates into a $68,000 savings. So I think the program to this point has been a success. I recognize that it's a change, and sometimes it's difficult to buy into these kinds of new programs. I would say that from everything I've heard from speaking with Mike and just Mike Woods, and personally, the number of calls, negative calls, has been very limited. I think we went through a few calls early on, but I think people have by and large bought into the program, so that's good news for us. The Yentile project, certainly this was a key project. The deadline for bid submissions is coming up on February 5th. The Yentile Committee will be meeting on the 17th, and I'll be able to provide them with an update. Would expect to have award a contract within the next couple of weeks, with the expectation of beginning work in March, and with the expectation that we will have the project substantially completed by the end of this year, or at the latest early spring of next year. Project being $4.8 million. The facilities master plan, this is an ongoing project with the Cecil Group. Cecil is right now in the information gathering stage. They've met with general government departments. We provide a lot of information to them about our facilities. They're also meeting with the school department. The plan is to develop alternatives in April or thereabouts. There will also be, as part of this process, a public, first of all of these meetings are public, certainly, so that anyone can attend, but there will also be specific efforts made to solicit comment from the public, most likely through a survey. And I think one of the goals for me out of this project is to really reduce the randomness of pursuing different facilities. In the absence of some kind of a game plan, there's really no rationale as to which facilities are addressed next. So I think that's a key outcome for this. I think also being able to really understand what the space requirements are for various departments and how those space requirements can be addressed is important. The substance abuse issue, we're all certainly well aware of it. There's been certainly a number of different forums on this issue. The unfortunate reality is that we've seen a significant increase in the number of overdose calls based upon records from the fire department. They note that in calendar 2012, there were 18 responses to overdose calls. Calendar 13 went up to 36, 14, 61, calendar 15, 66 calls responding to overdose situations. And as I think many people know at this point, this past year we had 8 deaths as a result of overdose situations, 3 the prior year. So there's no question this is a serious issue. It's really a national epidemic. Communities across the country are dealing with it. From our perspective, there are a number of different departments that deal in one way or another with the substance abuse issue, whether it's the police department, in efforts to try to assist not only the victims but the families, fire responding to all these calls, the schools, health, veterans, elderly services. They're all dealing with some element of this problem. And I believe that we need to have a coordinated effort to address it in a more comprehensive way. I'm proposing that $80,000 be earmarked to provide prevention and support programs, that we use those funds, or a portion of those funds, to help triage residents in crisis, to appropriate treatment facilities and resources, and also to provide family members with the support and direction that they need. I would expect that we would partner with an organization that is experienced in this type of work, both clinical and social service involvement. And my expectation is that we would do this through the coalition that I established last year, which has representation from the police, fire, schools, health, veterans, and elderly services. Also has a resident on this committee, and we would use them as kind of a sounding board and a guide in terms of developing the programs that will stem the tide here. Also, I would like to talk a little bit about a proposal for the dog park. One of the things that came out of the Yentile Farm Committee that Selectman O'Connell chaired was the desire to have a dog park. One of the advantages to the level of effort that was made to seek community output was this strong desire to have some kind of a dog park. When we looked at the location, the entire project area was really deemed incompatible to have a dog park in that location. So we began looking at other alternative sites, and I'm pleased to say that we've identified a location just south of Town Park from Route 38. If you know the area, just south of the parking lot there, the plan would be to clear an area there about half acre, would be fenced in, and have be available to individuals to bring their dogs and let them roam. So that project is estimated to cost about $35,000, and the plan is to use recreation revolving funds to complete that work. The July 4th, as you know, this July 4th celebration has been in the news of late. This event has been an ongoing event now for 35 years. It really, in my estimation, is as critical and as embedded in Wilmington as the Thanksgiving Day football game is. People have long expected the event to happen, and as you know, there's a request that has been made to the Board of Appeals for a special permit to use the former Swain parking lot as a site of a carnival. Understandably, the residents in that area have expressed some concerns. I think the July 4th committee has made some legitimate efforts to try to mitigate some of those concerns, modifying the hours of their events, reducing the scale of the carnival, offering to pay for additional police details. It remains to be seen whether the Board of Appeals will ultimately approve this project, this proposal, but I'm proposing to put $25,000 aside to provide some type of support for a July 4th activity. Just in conclusion, I would just like to recap certainly some of the goals that are once again pursuing here. First of all, I think it's a key tenet that we continue to estimate revenues conservatively. Education is a critical part of the overall mandate for town government, and we're looking to support them to the greatest extent we can. Building efficiencies, the fleet, looking to save money through fuel efficiency, I think continues to be important. Technology, we continue to want to make upgrades to our technology, not only for our internal purposes, but also for the external customer. And then maintain this capital plan, I think is important that we have a vision of where our priorities are and what projects need to be funded. The continuing to look at our financial planning and preparing policies that address the issues of borrowing and how we go about deciding the amount of reserves to set aside. And then also looking to control expenditures and maintain healthy free cash foundation account reserves. All of these things I think continue to be important. I would just note that I believe that we currently, with the budget that is before you, have a sustainable operation. But I think we always have to be mindful of decisions that we make today in terms of the implications that they have for tomorrow. Expenditures that are made that become embedded in government, so to speak. We don't want a situation where over the course of time those embedded costs outstrip the revenue that we receive from year to year. So that's why I think it's important to be very mindful of what we're making commitments to. And I would just close by noting the work of local government is to provide high-quality services to all members of the community, regardless of age, background, or economic status. Local government is the catalyst for commerce, an incubator for the next generation, and to some measure, protectors of civil society. The budget serves to purposefully allocate limited resources to the community for the mission of service to others. In the words of the late Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., quote, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" End quote. It is my sincere hope and expectation that the budget provides some of those answers. And just in closing, I would like to first of all acknowledge some of the folks in the audience here, certainly the members of the school committee. See Steve Bjork, Ginny Bonish, Julie Bassard, Peggy Kane, also certainly Mary Delay and Paul Ruggiero, members of the Finance Committee, Neil Ellis as well. So I want to thank you for being here, and also want to acknowledge the members, the people that are here from some of the department heads. One of the things that I would tell you is that this is hard work, generating a budget, but I think it's even harder to execute the plan. And I really want to give hats off to all the department heads that I work with, because over the past 3 years, as I've put these budgets together, it's one thing to put a plan together, it's another thing to have it executed. And thanks to the support of the department heads, these plans have been executed. So really hats off to all of the department heads that I have the pleasure of working with. And also I want to pay tribute to the folks in my office who have had to deal with me over the last few months as we try to pull this together. I mean, this is in some measure like a marathon. We start the process in October. I send out the directive to departments to begin revising their capital plans, and then I send out another directive to begin preparing the operating budget. So we go through that whole process. It's a lot of time and energy, and tonight, I guess having run this a few times, this is a bit like Heartbreak Hill. Depending upon the comments, I guess, that come back, it may be a heartbreak, it may not. But from that perspective, anybody who's run the marathon realizes that the race doesn't begin until you get to Heartbreak Hill, and that's when the race really begins. And so, from a budget perspective, now the work begins. Certainly, receiving commentary from the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee meetings will be coming up. As you can see, we have dates throughout February, and it will all culminate with the public hearing on March 15th, and ultimately the town meeting on April 30th. With regard to the staff, certainly I want to acknowledge Wendy Martinello in my office, really a key player in the office. I really appreciate all of her work and enthusiasm. She's the one that puts the health and benefits fair together, that has grown substantially over the years, is involved in all of the procurement process, and is one of those types of folks that's forever coming into the office and asking, is there anything you need me to do? And I really appreciate that. Also, she doesn't happen to be here this evening, but wanted to acknowledge Jackie Laverty. She's our newest addition. Incredible personality. I just really appreciate her positivity. Is willing to take on any project, regardless of whether she's done it before or not. And she's been a great asset to the team. Also, want to acknowledge certainly Beverly. Beverly Dalton has been a long-standing team player, and she is responsible as part of this process for putting together the personnel book, which reflects the positions, all the positions that we have in town. She's also responsible for the town report and the town calendar. She has literally the whole budget calendar down by heart and keeps me on track, so I'm not missing deadlines, and so I want to thank Beverly as well. I also want to acknowledge Lorraine Herman, who is the assistant town accountant, and she is very heavily involved in the number crunching as we go through the process and making sure that the accuracy is there in terms of putting everything together that's required to generate this document. Mike Morris, he's been doing this longer than I have by a few years, and I want to extend my appreciation to him because I often take his counsel in terms of what we need to be doing with regard to borrowing, what the DOR thinks of different approaches that we may be considering. So hats off to Mike. And then certainly last but not least, Kendra Amaral, the assistant town manager. I purposely had her asked her to be very involved in the budget process, and I think it's been really to my advantage. She's an incredible talent in terms of not only her technology wizardry in terms of putting all this together, because I'd be at a loss in terms of putting this together, but beyond that also just being able to bounce things off of her and have some real discussions about the approaches that we need to be taking on different budgetary items. So, this is a process that isn't done by one person, and I really appreciate all the support that I've gotten over these last 3 years on this. So, with that, I would be open to any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Thorough, comprehensive. What I'd like to do is certainly begin with the Board of Selectmen here and invite contributions or commentary or questions, and then at the conclusion of that, we'll go to the audience. So I guess I'll start from the inside out. I don't know if I'll sort of start to my right and go out towards my.
Thank you. Jeff, I really appreciate the marathon analogy. I know exactly what you mean. You turn the corner and Heartbreak Hill. But seriously, the conservative reviewing projections, revenue projections, is so important. And the 9 years that I've been on this board and sat through 9 of these, it's just hard to explain to people how important that is. I don't have to explain to anybody here. The Finance Committee knows what we're talking about, the department heads. The long-term planning, obviously, is something that I personally think is extremely important in this whole process. Being a department head as well, I've seen the other side too. So hats off to you and your staff, and a very nice presentation.
Mr. Neal?
Well, I just have two comments. One is a comment that I've been making for many years, both with Jeff's predecessor and to Jeff in the last 3 years, is that is a continuity to what we do. When I say we, that's the royal we as a town, and I think that we're well served by that approach. And if you look at this year's budget message, it's a continuation of last year's message, and that was a continuation of the prior year, and so on. So I think it's important for the town to have that kind of continuity and that kind of consistency, and it's obviously based on things like the point that Lou made about conservative revenue projections being one of the cornerstones of this budget process. So I think every year I make that point, and I just wanted to make that again. In terms of this particular budget, especially with members of the school committee and the school superintendent present, just wanted to reiterate how much I appreciate their leadership with the social emotional piece. I've talked to folks about that, and I was always been a traditionalist in terms of reading, writing, and arithmetic. The reality is, I think when you look at people who are struggling, it's usually not because they can't add, it's because they can't relate to people. So, Again, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Mr. McCoy, we'll go.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, let alone a household budget is difficult, let alone the town budget is a very difficult process. And I believe here in the community, we get a great bang for our buck. I'm really glad to see that the school has increased 4% relative to our kids. And once again, I'm really glad to see that the substance abuse program, this is something that's been around a long time, not this particular program. I'm glad to see the manager is putting money into this because there are a lot of troubled folks out there and they need help and families are reaching out for help, and it's better off to give the kids help rather than to incarcerate. I firmly believe that. And I've always said it, I was a skeptic early on when it came to the recycling program. I said to Jeff, if I see it work, I will say that it works. And I can honestly say at my home at 11 Tricia Road, we have 5 adults living there, and it's working fine. I was really hesitant in supporting the program. I didn't think it would work as well as I thought it could work, but I was wrong. I'll admit that. I think it's a great program. My son Chris is in charge. He goes, Dad, I know you're the selectman, but paper goes in recycle. It doesn't go in the trash. So he takes care of that. So, and I did purchase that other barrel immediately for $35, best investment I can make. And it's working great. And I'm glad to see that. So I think you said we saved about $68,000 thus far by that program.
On that,
Memory serves me.
to that point, yes.
Yeah. And with transferring from oil to natural gas, another savings of $500,000. I mean, that's big dollars. That really is significant. And you add that with the $68,000, so we're doing very well in this town. I got to take my manager, the assistant town manager. We have fantastic department heads that really, really care. Here, it's really customer friendly here, and it really has to say it. I have to say it. The new person that you hired in the town hall, I don't think I've ever met her, but she has a sweet voice, nice, kind voice, and that says a lot. And so, everyone's done a great job here. It's very customer friendly. I hear positive things with all the departments and all the town employees doing a fantastic job. Once again, thank you.
Thank you. A lot of the points have already been made, so I don't want to be redundant, but I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank the town leadership team. Obviously, as you indicated, Jeff, this is the collaborative work of many minds and working hands, and certainly want to extend my sincere thank you to all the people that are here tonight and for the other personnel that were not able to be here. I think the points that were made, particularly by Selectman Newhouse about the continuity year over year, I think that remains true, and I think the notion of sustainability, past, present, future, to make sure that we poise this town to move into fiscal year 17 and beyond. And it's clear that we have a multifaceted budget that, obviously we need to pay our bills, we need to take care of our personnel and see that we attract people to come and work at Wilmington and to frankly stay here for years and years to come. And I think that that's a real positive thing. I'm very pleased to see that we continue to foster the very productive working relationship that we have with the school department. And you can see that there's a significant portion of the budget that's going there, as well as all the other key initiatives that the town has. And I think as much as it's about today and living for today, it's really also all about the future, and I think that's really represents a big part of that. So I certainly support that. I think having sat through these as a school committee member and now as a member of the Board of Selectmen, and just as a resident in general, we have a certain expectation of what you would typically see in a budget, and I think it's important to compliment the town leadership team that year over year I see evolution in areas that will take what we're doing and potentially make things better, such as the enhancements in technology, the energy efficiency. I'm pleased to see that we're evolving, as a school system to not only look at the curriculum, but learning strategies and how we can increase test scores, but at the same time, we're taking a new dimension, whether it's in education or elderly services or veteran services or just residents in general with public safety, and looking at the social, emotional, and behavioral piece. And I think it's important. 5 years ago, we didn't have these conversations in these budgetary meetings, and now we are. And we're actually putting money, not just people with hearts that care about the kids, but we're actually putting financial resources, and we're taking a collaborative approach and a coalition approach as a town to try and work together towards some of the challenges and the problems that we face, and then you couple that with some of the OPEB liabilities and some of the financial things. So I look at it as past, present, future, that we're living for today, but we're planning for tomorrow. And to me, you take that in addition to the increase in residential property values as an example, it's still, to me, the future is bright in my opinion. I walk out of here feeling very uplifted and very proud and hopeful as a resident of the town that I see that we're changing for the better, and we're making some key investments. And so, a couple years ago, maybe a few years ago, we were named the most affordable suburb in Massachusetts. And I think if we continue to do some of the things that I see reflected in this budget, I think that we're on to bigger and better things, even beyond what we're enjoying today. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, to the members of the board, and quite frankly to the residents at home that are going to be seeing this budget at town meeting coming soon and continuing to come and support the goals and initiatives that are set here tonight. So in closing, I just wanted to say thank you to you, Jeff, and to your entire team for putting this together. And I look forward to helping you implement future plans going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I have the unfortunate place of being last among my colleagues to make commentary, and I don't know that I can add to, or certainly I can't improve upon anything that you've said. I would, I guess, only simply say that I echo a lot of the sentiment that I've heard so far, and want to compliment you, Jeff, for creating an environment of collaboration with all of the department heads. And it's not just the department heads, but it's the people that report to them as well. So you have the challenge is to get buy-in from everyone through the ranks within town government, within the employees, to really embrace the message and to embrace the mission. And I think largely we've been successful doing that for now decades, and so I compliment you for maintaining that. Some of the priorities that I heard, and of course, I compliment my colleagues for recognizing them as well. The lion's share of our budget, or a majority of our budget, is allocated to schools when it's appropriate, at least in my opinion. It takes a village, and we ought to be taking care of the young of our community first and foremost, because ultimately they're going to be taking care of us at some point. Energy enhancements, certainly a massive priority as we go forward, looking for every opportunity to save money and be conscientious about our carbon footprint in the environment. Technology enhancement, using the technology as a tool, being efficient to make the personnel that we have more productive and more efficient with how they engage in their day. And the capital improvements and fiscal stability. So, the one commentary we've kind of joked about it in the past is this notion of free cash. With it, it isn't free and it isn't cash. It's not my commentary, but the idea that it's just there and available. It's not necessarily just there and available. It's there for a purpose. It's there to stabilize the town. It's there for rainy day when the economy isn't as fruitful as it is now, and the town has to maintain the existing level of services that the population have come to depend on. That's what that rainy day fund will be there for. Not to mention the fact that it helps us maintain high ratings with Standard & Poor's, and that helps us borrow it at appreciable rates. So, there's purpose behind all of these things. We don't just have a bunch of money in the bank to dip into and spend willy-nilly. So I compliment you for that as well. So thank you very much, Jeff, for all of that. I wanted to acknowledge, and I'm glad you acknowledged the folks in the room, so I won't go through that again, but I did want to say hello and acknowledge that Chief McClelland and Chief Begonis are also in the room, so thank you, gentlemen, for being here as well. That said, I think we've gone through the Selectmen commentary, so I will indeed go to the audience here, and if anyone has questions or commentary about the budget presentation you just heard, raise a hand and be recognized. Ms. King.
Thank you. I'm sitting here watching this and I'm thinking of the many times I've also seen these budget presentations. And I'm thinking of people who say to me, when I go to other communities for school committee business, they say, you don't have fees? What do you mean you don't have fees? How does that happen? And my answer to them is not that the school committee did that, it's the town. And I really feel so strongly that this town has been so supportive and getting more so year after year of the school department. And we have the same similar attitudes about being conservative and trying to get the biggest bang for our buck, being educated. Our new principal, she's not quite yet still, but Mary, having our new superintendent, when that happened, of course we're thinking, oh boy, we're having a big change here. How will this work out? And as everybody knows, it has worked out beautifully because we couldn't have a better person. She believes in education totally. She educates us as a school committee on why we need to have these things in the budget. We heard our budget 4 times. So we probably could tell you what the budget is. And we can assure you that the budget and the fact that she did this with Mr. Hull, and they worked together. When you talked about collaboration, I think that's made a huge difference. That's really wonderful to have that. And we have a person who's educating us, the town, different people as to why we need these things. We didn't think of this new idea about the unfortunate use of
Substances.
thank you. Yeah, there I am right there. The social, emotional, behavioral health attitudes. And Mary, that's something that happened to be at the right place at the right time. And when everyone got together, it came out that was going to be a priority. And she brought that to us, but so did the other department heads from your side of the town side. So we really are very grateful for how much support the town gives to the school system. And we feel like I think it's all right to speak to you. We feel like it's reassuring that we have this happening, and we can go and ask for answers, and we could work together to put together a budget like this. And we really appreciate what you've given to the school system, and we will take very good care of that and make sure it works, and our programs are very rewarding for our pupils. So thank you very much. And this is we've heard Jeff's now twice, and you did it 2 different ways. Mary did hers 4 different ways. So we really thank you that we get to see this, and it really is gratifying to know that you don't realize till you go out and talk to other communities. We are very, very lucky here in Wilmington, and everybody works extremely hard, and so I'd like to congratulate you on your hard work too. It's a lot. It takes a lot of effort to do this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, thank you all. Thank you all for being here as well. Thank you, Jeff. Unless does anyone else have additional comments from the town?
Well, with regard to Ms. Kane's comments, right back at you.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so with that said, we can go to new business and committee reports as it may be applicable, but I'm guessing there may not be an awful lot to offer here, so I'll start right down here, Mike.
Nothing tonight.
Oh.
We meet every week now.
I know, it's every week. We're going to build something up to it the next week. Just no thought. Ready?
All set.
As am I, thank you. Jeff, just want to review important dates, but yes.
Important dates. Finance committee meetings start tomorrow here in room 9. We'll be doing the overview of technology revenue, followed by the next finance committee meeting on the 4th, which is Thursday, planning, building, Board of Appeals, and Board of Health. The last day to submit petition articles is February 5th. February 8th is the next Board of Selectmen's meeting. February 9th is another Finance Committee meeting, Department of Public Works and Public Buildings. February 10th is the last day to register to vote for the presidential primary. February 11th is the next Finance Committee meeting at the Memorial Library, Vander Room, regarding rec, library, and elderly services. And then February 17th is the Yentau Farm Development Committee meeting here in room 9 at 6:30.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you all. Good night.